Hello, football fans, and welcome to part 2 of Road to the Big Game, the series where we look at to the lead up of a given Super Bowl. And just to remind you, the game, Super Bowl IX. The date, January 12th, 1975. The location, New Orleans, Louisiana, at Tulane Stadium in front of nearly 81,000 fans. The teams, one with the most dangerous passing game in the league and a defense that would make the best QBs or even running backs fear for their safety. A team that some thought would already be champions at this point, the Minnesota Vikings. The opposition, one of the few defensive cores that rivals theirs and may have already exceeded them. An offense that has a gritty and aggressive running game, but a passing attack that leaves a bit to be desired. Talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. In the short history of the Super Bowl, neither one has won the big game. But at least the Vikings have been there, as we covered in part 1. They've made it twice. They came up on the losing end both times, Super Bowl IV and the previous year in Super Bowl VIII. Although at least they have an NFL championship to show for it. The Steelers have never even come close to winning a major sports championship in their 40-plus year existence at this point as of the 1974 season. And indeed, in part 2, we'll take a look at the journey of these Steelers, as it is now time for a backstory. Art Rooney was a native of Pittsburgh, born in 1901. He was a well-rounded athlete himself, who was recruited by Notre Dame to play football, recruited by the Boston Red Sox to play baseball, and even to the 1920 Olympics to represent the U.S. as a boxer. But it was his founding of a semi-pro football team, the Hope Harvey Football Club, in the 1920s, that he realized that promoting sports events, especially football, was his true calling. Along with brothers Dan and Jim, Art worked hard to produce the Hope Harvey Football Club, where Art would actually play QB for a time. But the Rooney clan longed for a pro football team to join the city of Pittsburgh. Football was popular in Pittsburgh, but due to religious laws of the time, keep in mind it was the 20s, Sunday being the Sabbath, it was hard to get an NFL franchise who played their games on Sundays. The NFL itself was also still in its infancy. Pittsburgh was a town that loved its sports. Baseball's Pirates, which were established all the way back in 1887, were the toast of the town, and had just won their second World Series in 1925 and won the NL pennant in 1927. But thankfully, times change and laws change as we head into the 1930s. And indeed, in the spring of 1933, Rooney was granted an NFL team that would take the field later that fall. They would be named the Pittsburgh Pirates, the same as the baseball team. And actually, this was fairly common practice in sports, using a name that the city is already familiar with and synonymous with. Actually, just a few years before this, a failed hockey team in the NHL was called the Pittsburgh Pirates. They had just moved after they crumbled. The football Pirates sucked. Every year, they were off the plank before the end of the season. A combined record from 1933 to 39 of 22, 55, and 3. Attendance at Forbes Field actually wasn't too bad, but there was no passion for this team whatsoever. And to be honest with you, some question even if Art Rooney and his family had any passion for this team. Rooney was a known gambler, literally, on horse racing. That seemed to be a big focus of his. And he ran operations in terms of all the Pirates, that is, day-to-day operations, also promoting boxing fights and betting out of the Fort Pitt Hotel, which is basis of operation. Some say it was Rooney's success at gambling that actually kept the Pirates afloat from going under. Rooney, however, took more of a keen interest on making this team a success, however, as the 1940s rolled along. But in 1940, he sought a new name for this team. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette began a mailing contest for candidates, and a panel would select the best one. And, honoring this city's steel city industry, the Pittsburgh Steelers, a name first suggested by sports editor Arnold Goldberg, was the new name. And it was a hit. The team was still a miss. 1940 and 41, the team was a disaster. In 1942, however, the team did have a 7-4 record, their first above 500. And some temporary mergers had to take place with other teams due to many players serving in World War II. The Steelers were back on their own again, however, in 1945, and things still didn't look that great. Despite, however, great play from superstar Bill Dudley, who for the second time in his career ran for 600 yards, plus that is, in 1946. But despite losing Dudley to Detroit in 1947, the Steelers had their best season in their history, 8-4-0 record, but would lose a divisional playoff tiebreaker to their hated rivals, the Eagles, 21-0. The end of the decade, the Steelers fell back once again. In the 1950s, however, they had a few winning records, but nothing beyond that. No playoff games whatsoever. However, this isn't to say the team didn't have great players, as the 1950s were seen as the Butler-Staunton years. Cornerback Jack Butler, defensive lineman Ernie Staunton give the Steelers fans something to cheer about. And that's something else too. Fans were still coming out to see this team. And some say the origins of the Steelers' reputation of always relying on defense began with Butler and Staunton. Both made the all-decade team for the NFL in the 1950s. Both made it to Pro Bowls, had first and second team selections, and were both future Hall of Famers. It was finally in 1962 where the Steelers at last showed promise again with a 9-5 season, making it to what is known as the Playoff Bowl, their runner-up game for second-place finishers, but they lost to Detroit. The Steelers, again, well-liked in their hometown, but baseball pirates, well, they just ruled that city completely. And made that known when they won the 1960 World Series and had one of the best in the game in Roberto Clemente. 30 years in existence, but the Steelers had nothing to show for it. Rooney was really taking a task with the local sports media. Also, drafting and scouting left a lot to be desired in the history of this team at this point. Coaches who were just out of touch with the evolving game didn't help matters. And that's why one of the reasons why third overall pick from 1948, quarterback Bobby Lane, didn't want to play for Pittsburgh. Most of his Hall of Fame career was carved out in Detroit. Although, oddly enough, who the Steelers obtained that draft pick from. Lane did finish his career at the Steelers, however, and had some pretty good seasons there. The Steelers took Bobby Gage in the 1950 draft, a back out of Clemson who would play a few different positions. He only lasted 2 seasons, and 2 picks later, another back, Rob Good, was taken, whose career would also be a bit short, but was taken by the Redskins, and he actually still had 2 Pro Bowl selections. In 1952, they took Ed Modzelewski, fullback out of Maryland. He only played 10 games for them, passing up on future Hall of Fame halfbacks Hugh McElhenny and Frank Gifford. In 1956, they took halfback Art Davis of Mississippi State 5th overall. He played 1 season. They passed up on Lenny Moore, who was taken 4 picks later by the Colts. The Steelers, however, weren't the only ones guilty of that folly. But hey, look, in 1957, they took quarterback Len Dawson, 5th overall from Purdue. He lasted 3 seasons in Pittsburgh and wasn't deemed good enough to be a starter. So he was shipped to Cleveland. Didn't do much there either. But then he went to the AFL to the Dallas Texans. Hey, crisis averted, eh? No. The Texans became the Kansas City Chiefs. Dawson led into 3 AFL championship titles, 2 Super Bowl appearances, and a Super Bowl win. Again, being the Vikings in that Super Bowl 4 upset, no less. Dawson, game MVP. And yes, he would later be inducted into the Hall of Fame. I should note the Steelers kept giving away draft picks with barely a bag of footballs in return in this era. Year after year, they'd have the fewest selections of the draft from 1958 to 61 and again in 63. Oh, but this graphic does not show the worst mistake of all. Oh, I'm saving that. In 1955, in the 9th round of the draft, the Steelers took Johnny Unitas, a hometown boy. This could have been the biggest steal in NFL history for the Steelers. Hey, well, it was the biggest steal in NFL history for the Colts. Yes, Steelers coach and resident dumbass Walt Kiesling felt that Unitas wasn't smart enough to be a quarterback. So yeah, he went to Baltimore and became one of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of the game. Damn, where's the Tylenol? Anyway, back to 1963, where the Steelers at least made a good pick that year. It was at 220th overall, 16th round. They picked linebacker Andy Russell out of Missouri. There was a reason that the Steelers were the ones who eventually took him, because his father did not want him playing pro football. He said no to every question on every questionnaire that NFL teams sent him. But here's how disorganized the Steelers were, although this time at least played to their benefit. They never sent him one! So they didn't know he didn't want to play. At 6'2", 225 pounds, he never missed a game in either high school or college, and was known for his durability. He was also very intelligent, had great leadership skills, and he could create turnovers. He would have played in a rookie year with the Steelers in 63, before completing Army commitments in 64 and 65, but he finally joined the team full-time in 1966. In 1963, the Steelers had a winning record, but couldn't make the playoffs. In 1964, they made a key acquisition as they grabbed defensive tackle Ray Mansfield from the Eagles, a big 6'3" and 250 pounds. His ability to push through opposing linemen was actually quite good. But that will eventually move him from defense to offense by 1966 as a member of the offensive line, as their center. That's a move they will not regret. But the losing and eye rolling continued. 3 losing seasons in a row from 1964 to 66. A combined record of 12, 29, and 1. The end of the 64 season saw Buddy Parker finally dismissed as coach for 8 seasons, thank God. The awful 1965 season was the only year for Mike Nixon as bench boss. Adios. And the Bill Austin era, I guess, began in 66. Okay, look, I know Art Rooney Sr. is practically a god of Pittsburgh. And you know what? Rightfully so. But in this era, for a team that was established in 1933 and has accomplished so little by the near mid-1960s, he needs to take a portion of the blame. Sure, like any other owner, I'm sure he and the members of his family who helped him run operations were perfectly content with fans simply coming into games and money simply coming in. But there was no passion, no heart. And while they certainly wouldn't be the first group of owners in the history of this sport, and certainly not the last in that aspect, all of them, especially Art, had to be getting fed up with this. It was clear the fans might eventually just stop coming to games. There were slight declines in attendance, nothing drastic, however. Even if it wasn't overly alarming at the time, something needs to be done. General Manager Francis Fogarty has been loyal to the Rooney since 1951, so of course he gets rewarded for this. And I will say, over the course of Steelers history, even being felt to this day, that can be both rewarding and detrimental to the growth of a team. Loyalty is good, it's great, but not always what's best for a team's future. Fogarty didn't always make bad moves, but the deals he'd make, most of them, were not panning out. And as I mentioned earlier, he was hurting the Steelers bad in the draft every year. They didn't make any waves in the 67 draft either, but someone who went undrafted at least would catch a break. And that would be offensive guard out of Allen University in South Carolina, Sam Davis, 6'1", 255 pounds. He was given a chance to try out for the Steelers in the 67 season and made the roster. And he can hopefully lend substance to an otherwise offensive line with his bulldozing style of blocking. The Steelers, however, still sucked in 1967. They finished 4-9-1. Their very mediocre offense was 10th best out of 16 teams. Their defense was 9th. They had a decent receiver, however, in J.R. Wilburn, who caught for 767 yards and had a Pro Bowl defensive back in Marv Woodson, who caught 7 interceptions. However, in the 16th round of the draft in 1968, 417th overall, the Steelers picked Robert Patrick Blyer, better known as Rocky, a running back out of Notre Dame. He helped the Irish to a national championship in 1966. During his 3 years there, he accumulated 1,208 yards from scrimmage, 786 yards rushing, 422 receiving, 14 touchdowns overall, 11 of them rushing. In his final year, he had 357 yards rushing, 171 yards receiving, totaling 520 yards from scrimmage, and 7 total touchdowns. Many teams passed him due to the feeling that he didn't have the right size for the pros. But what sometimes many scouts overlook in all of pro sports is heart, and Blyer had plenty of it. The Steelers also needed a punter, so they obtained Bobby Walden, who spent the last 4 seasons with the Vikings. Beginning his career with a 3-season stint in the CFL with the Edmonton Eskimos and a partial stint with the Hamilton Tiger Cats, he played well with the Vikings for those 4 seasons there. He averaged a very impressive 42.9 yards a punt, and led the league in that category his first year there in 1964, and made the top 10 in the following 3 seasons. He has punted for a total of 11,067 yards thus far, and in 1967 averaged 41.6 yards a punt, and booted 3,117 yards total. Yep, they still suck. An abysmal 2-11-1. Needless to say, that ends the Bill Austin era of coaching. 4th worst offense, the absolute worst defense. Yeah, I know, hard to imagine. The big bright spot, however, was Roy Jefferson at receiver, who caught 58 passes for a league-leading 1,074 yards in receiving. And he was a second-team All-Pro. And Dick Hoke, yes, that's his real name, was 4th in rushing with 858 yards. And this was finally it for Fogarty as general manager in addition to Austin as coach. Fans at Pittsburgh felt it's about damn time Dan Rooney, one of Art's sons, would take over the day-to-day operations as GM. But the Steelers desperately need a coach who will not just whip this team into shape, but make sure the Steelers pick the right players for the team. No coach or GM of this team has held one or the other accountable in their history. They need a guy to challenge authority at times and sometimes be challenged back, but at the very least meet some ground. Sometimes butting heads isn't the worst thing in the world. Well, on January 27, 1969, the Steelers found their guy. And indeed, their new head coach would be 37-year-old Chuck Noll. As a player, he spent 7 seasons with the Cleveland Browns, winning 2 championships. Right after his retirement as a player in 1959, he took a job in the AFL with the Chargers, who at that time were in LA. First as a defensive line coach for 2 seasons, then became their defensive coordinator in 1962 and backfield coach, holding those titles all the way to 1965. As the team was down in San Diego, he got himself an AFL championship ring in 1963, where they had the best defense in the league. In 1966, he took a job with the Baltimore Colts as their defensive coordinator and backfield coach. In the 3 seasons there, the Colts were 3rd in defense in 66, 2nd in 67, and number 1 in 1968. And of course, that's the year where the Colts won the NFL championship, although they did lose Super Bowl III to the Jets, which again I've covered on this channel. The Rooney family was hoping Noll will breathe life into this dead team, especially on defense. But Chuck isn't just going to hope he can turn them into a machine. He's going to make it happen. And he will work extra closely with management to make this team into a contender. He's going to spend extra time on fundamentals that get overlooked. He's going to instill a style where everyone, from the biggest superstar to the biggest bench warmer, are going to contribute. Otherwise, they can look for somewhere else to play. Obviously, he's going to be very defensive-minded. The bright side about Noll as well is that he does not crave the spotlight. It's just about winning with him, plain and simple. And will always look for new ways and study new ways to do so. He has the mindset of, and I think y'all know where I'm going with this, whatever it takes. So came the 1969 NFL Draft, on the year where the National Football League celebrates its 50th anniversary. And it's taking place, of course, at the Belmont Plaza Hotel on January 28th, 1969, just a mere day after Chuck Noll was hired as head coach. He and the Rooneys are now determined to make this team an actual, team. And little did anyone know at the time, it was this draft that would change the trajectory of the Steelers' history forever. They had the 4th overall pick, and defense was the key. And Noll wanted to build it from up front. And that's why, with that pick, at defensive tackle from North Texas State, Mean Joe Green. There's many stories of where his nickname came from, although you could think of a few. For one, he spent from 1966 to 68 playing for the team known as the Mean Green. But also, his ferocious intensity, physical dominance, and disruptive aggression definitely has a lot to do with it. At a towering 6'4", nearly 275 pounds, he combines immense size, shocking quickness to overpowering offensive linemen, and able to hit the right gaps to get to his target. To go with the intimidation and versatility that he possesses, he also brings leadership. And with the Mean Green team, he was a consensus All-American in 1968. It was on this day that truly birthed the Steel Curtain. The Steelers made a good pick in the 3rd round, 56 overall, to further build on their offensive line, drafting John Kolb from Oklahoma State. At 6'2", 262 pounds, he'll be best utilized as an offensive tackle. And in his 3 seasons as a Cowboy, he was a 2-time second-team All-American and 2-time first-team All-Big 8 in 67 and 68. But the building of the curtain continued. In a monster of a steal in the 10th round, 238th overall, the Steelers took defensive end L.C. Greenwood out of Arkansas A&M. Size was definitely the name of the game in building this defensive core in Pittsburgh, and so was aggression. At a massive 6'6" and 245 pounds, Greenwood uses intense speed and hard hitting as his forte. Also a great reach, good for swatting passes, and could reach for difficult tackles. Noel and the Rooneys know what they want from this team, and they went for it in this draft. But they actually managed to have the Steelers become worse. The absolute drizzling shits. 1-13-0. Second worst offense. Worst defense. But as crazy as it sounds, the results were there in little ways. Mean Joe became instantly popular among Steelers fans with his style of play, and he accumulated 9.5 unofficial sacks and was named NFL's Defensive Rookie of the Year. Roy Jefferson was a first-team All-Pro, and his 1,079 yards receiving was second best. Andy Russell, the now veteran linebacker of 7 seasons, had a really good year too. Greenwood showed some promise as well, but there was still lots of work to do. It was clear the Steelers needed a quarterback, as this was something where they've had the worst luck with in their existence. And there's a top prospect available at quarterback in the upcoming 1970 NFL Draft. But the thing is, the Bears were also pretty awful, though 1-13-0 record themselves. And they too desperately need a quarterback. So a coin toss was set to take place between Art Rooney and Bears Baron George Halas to see who would get the number 1 pick in the draft. Well, luck was actually on the Steelers' side for once, and they indeed won the coin toss, which allows them to take first overall from Louisiana Tech, Terry Bradshaw, the big man with the powerful arm. He has had eyes on him for the last 2 years. The eyes were that of the most NFL teams and their scouts. He can make difficult throws with force, eluding defenders, but always make sure his receivers have the best communication from him. Bradshaw was also known for utilizing a unique grip, placing his ring finger on the first lace, his pinky near the fourth, and index near the top of the ball. It was what gave him his unique and powerful throwing style. He was physically tough, he could take punishment, he was resilient. And this is the type of player Chuck Noll could really mold into something special on the offense. In his 4 seasons with the Dogs, he threw for 6,199 yards passing, 39 touchdowns, but he did throw 42 picks, as this does seem to be his biggest weakness. 401 completions, an awesome, however, 127.2 passer rating, and led his team to a victory in the 1968 Rice Bowl. And he was the first team Little All-American in 1969. He worked his tuchus off to be a starter at Louisiana Tech, learning so much from his freshman and sophomore seasons, but in his junior year, he passed for close to 3,000 yards and had 22 touchdown passes. In his senior year, he was still very stellar, with 2,314 yards passing, 14 touchdowns, 136 completions, and a monster 140.6 passer rating. But the Steelers weren't quite done here. Ronnie Shanklin, a receiver out of North Texas, was taken second round, 28th overall. In 3 seasons, he had 2,464 yards receiving, 874 in his final year. He had 144 overall catches with 56 and 69. 17.1 yards a catch overall, and 15.6 in his final season. A huge 31 touchdowns in his collegiate career, with 10 coming in the final. A great reach, able to make spectacular catches to boot. Oh, but there's more. Oh, is there ever more? In the 3rd round, 53rd overall to strengthen their secondary, they took corner Mel Blount out of Southern. 6'3", he had the size, but he had the agility to stay at pace with the best. His bump and run technique is outright frustrating for receivers to handle, and it would actually eventually change the way the game was played. And Noel and the scouts saw this, however, and loved it. He was also aggressive, which is also what this team needed in a big way. He went overlooked by a lot of teams despite having all the right attributes. Well, their losses the Steelers gain. And the Steelers would also sign undrafted offensive lineman at guard Jim Clark in this era. And in the 1970 season, yeah, they sucked, but a lot less than usual, as they finished 5-9-0. They did lose Roy Jefferson to the Colts, who'd actually win the Super Bowl that year. Shanklin, however, proved his worth with a good rookie campaign. I should also mention this was the first year of the AFL-NFL merger, with the league now 26 teams strong. Steelers defense was 16th. Not great, but showing some life. Mean Joe had 8 sacks and went to the Pro Bowl. Andy Russell was also a Pro Bowl selection. How did Terry Bradshaw do in his rookie season? Not good at all. Throwing just 6 touchdown passes and 24 interceptions. Ouch. And a completion percentage under 40. He split duties that year, however, with another Terry Henratty, I think, or whatever you want to pronounce it, who wasn't much better. Thing is, though, Bradshaw does need a few more receivers in terms of depth. Also, Noel and the Rooney saw something positive here, even if some of the fans or even the media didn't at the time. At the 1971 draft, 8th overall from Grambling State, the Steelers take Frank Lewis at wide receiver. A speedy and hand-efficient receiver who can gain significant extra yardage after the catch, can run any route excellently, with great precision, and can make the long ball game work to a T. He was third-team Little All-American in 1970 and second-team Little All-American in 1969. But in the second round, the Steelers take 34th overall, linebacker Jack Ham out of Penn State. How is this man even still available in the second round to begin with? Well, it don't matter. The Steelers now have this pulverizing force on their team. Tremendous talent with an uncanny eye for the ball, able to read the run and also highly skilled at breaking up passing plays. A true playmaker in every sense of the word who can generate turnovers. And what does not get recognized about him even after all these years is how smart he really was, using his intelligence to commit these plays. He can make a brutal tackle, but he also showed great finesse. Much like Coach Noel, he didn't crave the spotlight, he craved the win. During his time at Penn State, he was consensus All-American in 1970 and 2-time first-team All-East in both 69 and 70. That's a great pick. Oh, but they're still not done. The Steelers made a solid pick in the 4th round, 86 overall. They took offensive lineman out of USC, Jerry Mullins, who was also used as a tight end during his time there, but the Steelers will indeed use him as an offensive line trenchman. 6'3", 244 pounds, he'll have some substance. But in that same round, 18 picks later, they took defensive end Dwight White out of East Texas State, I should say. Noel wanted to build on what he had with Green and emerging Greenwood on that defensive line, and yeah, I'd say this was a pretty damn good pick. 6'4", 255 pounds, they called him Mad Dog for a reason. He truly showed a never-ending ferocity game in and game out, and could viciously attack QBs and running backs, or anyone if necessary to make things happen. But, despite his off-the-leash style, he knew how to keep focus. Another very good pick here for the Steelers. We're still not done. 2 picks later, as we begin the 5th round, the Steelers took tight end Larry Brown out of Kansas. 6'4", 245, he was the ultimate extra blocker, and that's where his skills are going to come in handy in Pittsburgh. Although he is a very reliable receiver as well, as he proved during his time there, as Noel and the Rooneys continue to build depth for this club. No, we're not done. In the 8th round, the Steelers take defensive tackle Ernie Holmes out of Texas Southern. An ox of a man at 6'3" and 260 pounds. Intimidating, powerful, fierce. Looks like the steel curtain, if you will, is almost complete. He will assist his fellow defensive linemen in making big plays as a special wildcard factor. He is very unpredictable, being with a volatile nature, but again, if channeled right, he can make big things happen for the Steelers team. The way Noel was building up the toughness of this club was just getting downright scary. Next up, 11th round, 268th overall, safety Mike Wagner out of Western Illinois. Now Noel and company were trying to strengthen the secondary to complement Blunt. Wagner was a steal of a deal, tremendous ball hawk with amazing coverage abilities and able to read a given play and not easily fooled. This whole draft just goes to show the scouting system of the Steelers and Noel's capabilities and how well they're working. As they look beyond the stats, no, I'm not saying they're the first to ever do that, but it is key to building the Steelers team. It was primarily about how the player will work in Noel's system. And even this deep in the draft, they're realizing it can be very useful. As pivotal and game-changing as the 1969 draft was for the Steelers, This was the draft that built the soul of this team. Well, that was it for the draft, however, but they still made some more acquisitions. They actually took an undrafted safety, Glenn Edwards from Florida A&M, overlooked due to not being overly sizable in terms of his weight. But the fact is, he's an outright dirty player, and I don't necessarily mean that as an insult in this era. That's what Noel wanted. He needed to make this defense even tougher. Nasty as he wants to be, he'll do whatever he feels he has to give this team an edge. And Noel liked that quote. Yes, there it is again, whatever it takes attitude. The Steelers also got themselves a new kicker, Canadian Roy Girella, who has spent 2 seasons with the Houston Oilers before being picked up by the Steelers for the upcoming season. He's accumulated 163 kicking points, field goal percentage of 51.4. His career did get off to a rough start in his rookie year, but did better in the 1970 season, his first in the NFL with the merger, with 77 points and a 56.3 field goal percentage. And in 1971, they still suck, but once again, a little less than before, finishing 6-8-0. But it seems as though fans are starting to get a little more passionate about this club, loving their work ethic and grit, especially on the defensive side. Mean Joe Green was doing his thing in his 3rd season, makes it for the Pro Bowl for the 3rd straight season. Andy Russell again received the honor at linebacker. Jack Ham had a tremendous rookie season. L.C. Greenwood had a breakout year, his 11 sacks, and Dwight White made his presence felt in his rookie season with 9 sacks. As Blunt and Wagner were working hard to make the secondary effective and efficient. On the offensive side, Terry Bradshaw did improve drastically in many aspects. He was 6th in passing average, 4th in completions, 8th in completion percentage, and he was tied for 10th in touchdown passes, but still threw 22 interceptions, 5th most in the league. Shanklin, along with Dave Smith, were his top targets at receivers, while John Fuqua and Preston Pearson had a pretty good running game going. The team was ranked 17th both in offense and defense. Some were growing impatient with Noel, but importantly, the Rooneys were not, and neither were the players. In 1972, the upcoming draft, oh yes, they're going to make another splash. As indeed, 13th overall in the first round, fullback from Penn State, Franco Harris. The best combination of power, size, agility, and outright speed. A thinking man's hybrid runner who can avoid unnecessary hits, but can also break tackles when necessary, knowing when to make the right cut and make it for that big breakout run. He was deceptively fast, and while he did avoid hits, if he would collide with a defender, he could send them on their rear end if necessary. He could also catch short passes, eluding defenders. Again, he was the portrait of the perfect backfielder in the eyes of Chuck Noll and the Steelers staff. In 3 years at Penn State, he had 2,002 yards rushing, 5.3 yards a carry, with 24 touchdowns. He is a 2-time second-team All-East selection in 69 and 71. In his senior season, he had 684 rushing yards, 5.6 yards a carry, and 6 touchdowns. The Steelers have obtained another game changer. They built more to their offensive line, taking Gordon Grovell, 2nd round, 38th overall, at a towering 6'5" and 250 pounds, and playing 3 years at Brigham Young. He was a tough trenchman that could definitely give them some more depth on the offensive line, which still just seems incomplete. He was a 2nd-team All-American in 1971, and also named Western Athletic Conference Lineman of the Year. In the 11th round of the draft, 273rd overall, they took a quarterback, Joe Gilliam, out of Tennessee State. A 2nd-team Little All-American in 1971, an all-around natural athlete who also had experience in tumbling, track, and basketball. He was a little faster than Bradshaw actually when it came to scrambling, but he too had a powerful arm, just a different style, and he could strategize a good pass attack. And guess what? 1972, the Steelers no longer suck at all! Ha! They had their best season in franchise history. It took nearly 40 years, but the Steelers at last looked like a real football team. They finished 11 wins, 3 losses, and no ties. Chuck Noll had made them into the dominant force that they had the potential to be. Some even already saying them as the toughest team in football. Their offense shot all the way up to 5th. And that was thanks to the NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year, Franco Harris. 1,055 yards rushing, was 6th best in the league. And he became the first Steelers player ever to reach the millennium mark. And he was a second-team All-Pro to boot. And we'll actually get back to him in a second. John Fuqua was also key in the Steelers rushing game, as Terry Bradshaw actually didn't really have a great year. As now in his 3rd year, his abilities are now really being called into question. But that defense, ranked number 2 in the league, only behind the undefeated Miami Dolphins. And they were led by the NFL's Defensive Player of the Year, Mean Joe Green. So this was the first year the Steel Curtain was in full force. His 11 unofficial sacks were tied for 4th best, and his skills were stunning. Even some of the best pivots in the game just wondering, how does this man do what he does? Dwight White garnered a Pro Bowl selection with his tremendous play, garnering 10 sacks. Andy Russell, the veteran linebacker who for years was simply a bright spot on a bad team, is now surrounded by players that enhance his game as well. He's a second-team All-Pro. While former Giant Henry Davis also makes the Pro Bowl, so did kicker Roy Guerrilla. Ham had 7 interceptions, Wagner had 6, Blunt played like a champ out there, and the Pittsburgh Steelers made the playoffs for just the 3rd time in team history, clinching their division. And what took place on December 23rd, 1972 was nothing short of unbelievable. They're facing the tough Oakland Raiders squad at home at Three Rivers Stadium in the divisional playoffs. It looked bleak. So Steelers trailed just 7-6 with 22 seconds remaining in the game, and were at 4th down with 22 seconds left. It was do or die right at this moment. Their dream season could end in heartbreak. Quarterback Terry Bradshaw took the snap. He was under pressure. He was actually looking for Fuqua to complete a pass. Well, the pass went up, and the TV cameras just seemed to lose track of the ball. Where did it go? But the fans at Three River Stadium cheered loudly as it apparently bounced off the head of a Raiders safety, and out of the blue, coming into the focus of the frame on camera, Franco Harris suddenly had the ball and ran it all the way for a 60-yard touchdown. And yes, even people who don't know a damn thing about football know I'm talking about the immaculate reception. A play so storied, so controversial, and so incredibly insane that it seems stranger than fiction, and that it seemed too good to be true. And it is still talked about to this very day as if it only happened just yesterday. The crazy thing is, it bounced backwards into Harris's hands just mere inches from the ground. Some contend, however, it was Fuqua's head it bounced off of. Others say the ball hit the ground as Harris picked it up. And by some, I mean crybaby Raiders fans. There are replays, but the crazy thing is, obviously technology at that time couldn't conclusively verify any theory. A remarkable moment, 50 years later, that is forever etched in the legacy of professional football. And with it, the Steelers won their first ever playoff game, 13-7. The celebration in the greater Pittsburgh area was overwhelming. Steeler fever, after nearly 40 years, finally hit the fans of Pittsburgh. At the AFC Championship, however, they had to take on the undefeated Miami Dolphins. The Steelers, however, did take the fight to the fish. Down 21-10, however, Bradshaw engineered a comeback drive, but fell apart, turning the ball over twice late in the game. Steelers lose 21-17. But make no mistake about it, this was a great year. Pittsburgh sports fans now truly adored their Steelers. But they didn't stop building this team up. At the 1973 draft, the Steelers still felt it was important to keep building their secondary. And they did by picking in the first round, 24th overall, defensive back J.T. Thomas out of Florida State, a second-team All-American in his senior year of 1972, a hybrid of great zone defense and man-to-man coverage, with incredible speed and amazing tackling abilities, with vision and field awareness. Very good pick here for the Steelers. Also, Bud Carson, who was in charge of the defensive backs, was promoted to defensive coordinator, as Noel wanted to work side by side with him in developing the new whole system. He was the right guy for the job, no doubt. I mentioned how for years the fans of Pittsburgh were glad to have a football team, and they had people attend games, but again, that's all it was. Like the Vikings fans bleeding purple and gold, fans of Pittsburgh were now bleeding pure steel. The hard work of Chuck Noll, to their credit, at last the Rooney family, along with de facto general manager and director of player personnel Dick Haley, made this team something beyond just existing. They wanted to win, and Noll would settle for nothing less, and neither will his players now. The Steelers had another winning season in 1973. The city of Pittsburgh really rallied behind their sports teams at this time, as the tragic death of Roberto Clemente of the Pittsburgh Pirates really hit the whole community with a hard blow. The Steelers did finish with a very good 10-4 record, but they didn't win the division this year, as they finished tied with the same record as the Cincinnati Bengals, who won the division due to tiebreaker rules. The Steelers, however, still had the 4th-ranked offense, and once again, despite Harris dealing with injuries, he still ran for close to 700 yards and made the Pro Bowl. Quarterback consistency, however, was an issue for Bradshaw, as he struggled a lot, but still managed to help them win many games in key moments, and Henry and Gilliam got some playing time as well. But the faith in Bradshaw was actually starting to wear thin, especially on coach Chuck Noll. However, Ronnie Shanklin still had a great year receiving with over 700 yards and made it to the Pro Bowl. Kicker Roy Gorilla was actually a second-team All-Pro. It was going to be a huge fan favorite in Pittsburgh. The defense, however, had slipped to 8th. Still very good, but a bit shocking. That was mainly due to those bad losses they suffered. But either way, that isn't to say they weren't stellar. They were still top-notch. Jack Ham was incredible, second-team All-Pro. Russell was again selected to the Pro Bowl. The secondary, Wagner had 8 picks, and Cole led the league in interceptions, but didn't get any award recognition for even the Pro Bowl or Team All-Pro selections. The steal of a deal, however, that was Glenn Edwards, got 6 interceptions. Now, of course, that Steel Curtain, who Noll and Carson really helped develop in a huge way even further. Mean Joe, first-team All-Pro. Raywood and White go to Pro Bowl, 8.5 and 7.5 sacks respectively. And Holmes adds 7 sacks to boot. The Steelers did get a wild card berth for the playoffs, but the Raiders got their revenge and decimated Pittsburgh 33-14 in the divisional round. A rough loss. Constantly turnovers, bad offense, even the defense at certain times of the game just seemed lost. The media, the analysts, the experts, they jumped all over this, saying the Steelers were a bunch of fluke that are going to be heading back down to earth very shortly. There was even rumors that Bradshaw may not even be a starter next season at QB. Apparently they had their fleeting moment, and it was all but a footnote in Steelers history. But there are 2 things, however, that must be factored in. The Steelers themselves aren't losing faith. Chuck Noll makes it known that there's no chance in hell that he will let that happen, and will make improvements to the team going forward. Another thing? Yeah, okay. Like I said, the so-called experts have lost their faith in this team already. But their fans are sticking by them. They are keeping the faith that this Steelers team will bring home a championship. A few years before this, you couldn't pick a Steelers fan anywhere out of any given crowd. Now, they are wearing the colors of their teams proudly, day in and day out, during the season and off-season, as we get ready for 1974. And that indeed does it for part 2 of our look at Road to Super Bowl 9. And in part 3, we will look at the 1974 NFL season for both the Minnesota Vikings and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Stay tuned for that. In the meantime, like and share the video, subscribe to the channel, and until the next one, I'll see ya.